Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to explore new territory.
Well, today we're getting into the nitty-gritty of mental strength.
Ah, yes. Building that mental muscle.
Exactly. We're talking about how to finally break free from repeating the same mistakes over and over.
And let's not forget that other tricky thing, overcoming the resentment we sometimes feel when others seem to be hitting it big. That whole comparison thing.
Definitely a recipe for unhappiness. And to guide us through this, we're turning to an audio chapter from Amy Morin's 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do.
A fantastic resource, full of practical wisdom.
It really is. Consider this your cheat sheet to leveling up your mental game.
Absolutely. We're going to make sure you walk away with actual tools, not just some feel-good theories.
Because we've all been there, right? We've all stumbled and struggled with these things. It's part of being human.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. The first section focuses on breaking those annoying cycles of repeating mistakes. The ones where you're like, ugh, not this again.
Been there. Morin introduces us to this woman named Christy, a successful professional who just can't seem to stop yelling at her kids.
Oh, I know that feeling. It's like it's not effective, but you keep finding yourself back in that same pattern.
It's so frustrating. Have you ever felt stuck like that? Repeating the same mistakes even though you knew there had to be a better way?
Oh, countless times. And Maureen really nails it when she talks about why we get trapped in these unproductive loops. A lot of times it boils down to simple avoidance.
Avoidance?
Yeah, like facing our mistakes head on can be really uncomfortable. It brings up all those icky feelings, shame, failure, maybe even guilt. And who wants to deal with that?
Right, so we kind of sweep it under the rug.
Exactly. We come up with all sorts of justifications, maybe blame it on external factors, tell ourselves it wasn't that big of a deal, or just completely refuse to acknowledge the problem.
It's almost like we're protecting our ego, even if it ends up hurting us in the long run.
You hit the nail on the head, and sometimes it's even more than that. Pride and stubbornness can really get in the way, too.
Oh, I know, those can be tough to overcome.
Tell me about it. It can be so hard to admit we messed up, especially if we feel like we have a certain image to uphold.
Like we need to appear perfect.
Precisely. It's easier to just dig in our heels and defend our actions than to say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake.
And actually try to learn from it.
Right. And then there's that whole comfort zone thing.
The comfort zone. Always a tricky one.
It's so easy to get stuck there. We humans, we crave familiarity, even if it's not really good for us.
It's like that old saying, better the devil you know.
Then the devil you don't.
Exactly. We cling to what we know, even if it's a pattern of self-sabotage, because at least it feels safe and predictable.
Makes sense. But Morin doesn't stop there. She actually dives into how to break free from those patterns.
And she's got some brilliant strategies. Like she talks about Roland Macy, the guy who founded Macy's, the department store.
Oh, wow. That Macy's.
The one and only. But before he built his retail empire, you know what? He had a whole bunch of failed businesses.
Really? I would have never guessed. It's true. But here's the key. He didn't let those failures define him.
So what did he do?
He studied them. He meticulously analyzed what went wrong, what he could have done differently, how to approach things from a new angle next time.
So it's not about beating ourselves up for messing up. It's more about, like, being a scientist with our mistakes.
I love that analogy, turning failures into valuable data points.
Exactly. It's about asking, what can I learn from this? Rather than, what's wrong with me? It's a subtle shift, but I think it makes a huge difference.
It really does. And, Morin also emphasizes the power of a written plan.
A written plan.
Yeah, like a concrete roadmap for success. She compares it to those discharge plans they use in rehab facilities, where patients have a detailed plan for staying sober with potential triggers, coping mechanisms, all that stuff.
Oh, interesting.
It makes a lot of sense, right? Having that clear plan in place keeps you focused and gives you something to refer back to when things get tough.
Definitely takes the guesswork out of it. Like having a set of instructions to follow when temptation hits.
Exactly. It's all about creating a structure for success. And finally, she really hammers home the importance of self-discipline.
Self-discipline, the key to so many things, isn't it?
It really is. It's about tolerating some discomfort, using positive self-talk, and even setting some restrictions to make it harder to slip up.
Like those website blockers that keep you off social media when you're supposed to be working.
Exactly. It's not always easy, but it's absolutely crucial if you want to break free from those negative patterns.
It's about delaying gratification, resisting those impulses, and making the choices that align with our long-term goals.
You got it. It's like building mental muscle. The more we practice self-discipline, the stronger we become.
I love that. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and tackle that green-eyed monster, resentment.
Ooh, always a fun one.
Right. Morin introduces us to Dan, who seems to have a pretty happy life on the surface. Family man, decent job,
Sounds good so far.
but he secretly seethes with resentment towards his neighbors.
What? Why? What did the neighbors do?
They're just successful. Financially successful, that is. And Dan, even though he values family time more than money, he can't shake this feeling of being less than.
Oh, I see. It's that comparison game rearing its ugly head again.
Exactly. And I think this is something we all experience at some point. That twinge of envy or bitterness when we compare ourselves to others.
Resentment's a powerful emotion. It can really take hold of you. And often it comes from this feeling of unfairness.
Like we got the short end of the stick.
Right. We see others succeeding and it all seems so effortless for them. And we're over here thinking, why not me? What's wrong with me?
And that's where the trouble really starts.
Absolutely. We forget that success is almost never a straight line. It's easy to just see the end result and completely miss all the hard work, the setbacks, the sacrifices that got someone there.
And if we haven't taken the time to figure out what success actually means for us,
Ooh, that's a good point.
well, we're much more susceptible to envy, right?
Mm-hmm.
We end up chasing someone else's dream, which is a recipe for disaster.
It's like wearing shoes that don't fit. You'll never be comfortable no matter how nice they look.
Perfect analogy. Now, there's this part in Morin's book that really stopped me in my tracks. She talks about a study where people actually felt joy when a quote-unquote rich professional experienced misfortune.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up, isn't it?
It really is. It's like we're secretly rooting for their downfall. So does resentment actually change how we see others?
It definitely can, sadly. Resentment has this sneaky way of blinding us to the humanness of others, you know?
Like we forget they're just people trying to figure things out like the rest of us.
Exactly. Instead of seeing them as individuals with their own struggles and triumphs, we turn them into these caricatures.
Oh, I see. Like we only focus on their flaws and mistakes and kind of blow them out of proportion.
Exactly. And we conveniently overlook all the good stuff. And the worst part is, this distorted view not only prevents us from connecting with them authentically, but also it actually holds us back from our own growth.
That makes sense. If we're constantly focused on their downfall, we miss out on the opportunity to learn from their successes.
Right. It's like we get stuck in this negativity spiral, constantly comparing ourselves and feeling inadequate. And as Morin points out, this can lead to some pretty damaging behaviors.
Damaging how?
Well, resentment can fuel all sorts of things. Sabotage, gossip, even a willingness to abandon our values just to get ahead.
Wow, that's pretty serious. So resentment really is more than just a fleeting feeling. It can actually impact our actions.
It absolutely can. It's like a poison that slowly eats away at us. It distracts us from our goals, steals our joy, and ultimately prevents us from living a truly fulfilling life.
It sounds like we're talking about some pretty high stakes here. Morin calls resentment incredibly distracting, and I can definitely relate to that. Instead of pursuing our passions and focusing on what matters, we end up wasting precious energy obsessing over what others have.
It's a trap, and a really common one, too. It's like this constant background noise that drowns out our own inner voice.
So what's the antidote? How do we get rid of this resentment?
Well, thankfully, Morin doesn't leave us hanging. She offers a way out of this trap, and it starts with a powerful shift in perspective.
Ooh, a perspective shift. I love those.
Right. She says, instead of reading someone else's success story, it's time to write your own.
Okay, I'm listening. This is where things start to get really interesting. But how do we actually make that shift? How do we quiet those voices of resentment?
Well, she lays out some pretty concrete steps. First things first, we need to take an honest look at our own lives. Like, if we're genuinely unhappy with ourselves, it's time to do some self-reflection.
Some soul searching.
Exactly. Are we living in alignment with our values? Are our actions taking us closer to our goals, or are we just kind of spinning our wheels?
So it's about taking responsibility for our own happiness, not playing the victim or blaming external factors for our dissatisfaction.
You got it. And then we need to start challenging those negative thoughts that fuel the resentment. Remember that study about people feeling happy when the rich professional experienced misfortune?
Yeah, that was pretty eye-opening.
It really highlights how easily we can get caught up in stereotypes and make sweeping judgments about others based on very little information.
So step 2 is all about becoming aware of those biases and questioning those negative assumptions.
Exactly. And it's especially important in today's social media-driven world. We're bombarded with these curated highlight reels that only show the good stuff, making it easy to forget that everyone has their own
Oh,
struggles.
for sure. Social media can be a breeding ground for comparison and envy. We see those perfect pictures and start thinking, well, everyone else has their act together. What's wrong with me?
It's so easy to fall into that trap, but we need to remind ourselves that those pictures are just a tiny snapshot of someone's life. We're not seeing the full story. And, another big piece of this is stopping the comparisons.
Comparisons. Easier said than done, right?
It can be tough. But here's the thing. Everyone has their own unique strengths and challenges. Constant comparison is a recipe for misery because there will always be someone who seems to be doing better than us in some area.
So we need to learn to appreciate our own journey, even with all its bumps and detours.
Beautifully said. And finally, this next step is really crucial. We need to define our own version of success.
Define our own success. Isn't that a little self-centered? Like, what about societal expectations?
I know it might sound that way, but it's not about being selfish or ignoring societal norms. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from living a life that aligns with our own values and aspirations, not someone else's.
So we need to ask ourselves, what truly matters to me? What do I want to accomplish in this lifetime?
Exactly. It's about creating a vision for our lives that feels authentic and meaningful to us, not chasing someone else's dream. And Morin uses Dan, the guy who was resenting his neighbors, as a perfect example here. He eventually finds peace by shifting his focus.
How so?
He stops trying to keep up with the Joneses and instead prioritizes what he truly values, family time. And once he redefines success on his own terms, the resentment starts to fade away.
That's so powerful. It's like he finally steps into his own power and stops letting external factors dictate his happiness.
Exactly. And this leads us to the final and perhaps most challenging step in overcoming resentment. And it might sound a little counterintuitive.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What is it?
It's learning to celebrate others' wins.
Celebrate others' wins. But how can we do that when we're struggling with our own feelings of inadequacy?
It might feel strange at first, but it's actually a powerful way to shift out of that scarcity mindset. When we genuinely celebrate others' successes, it's like we're expanding our own capacity for joy.
Instead of seeing their success as a threat, we start seeing it as inspiration. Like, if they can do it, maybe I can too.
Exactly. And Morin highlights this amazing example of Peter Bookman. He's a serial entrepreneur, and you know what? He actually finds joy in seeing his former colleagues succeed.
Even if they're now his competitors.
Even then, he views their success as a reflection of the positive impact he had on their lives. And that's a pretty incredible perspective to have, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's like he shifted from that pie is limited mentality to a more abundant mindset. There's enough success to go around.
Exactly. He's not threatened by their wins, he's inspired by them. And Morin also brings up Herb Brooks, the legendary hockey coach who led the U.S. team to victory at the 1980 Olympics.
The miracle on ice, of course.
That's the one. He was famous for always putting his players first, even choosing to leave the ice right after their wins so they could have the spotlight.
Wow, that's true leadership. He really put his ego aside to celebrate their accomplishments. So where does all of this leave us? We've explored those two big roadblocks to mental strength: repeating mistakes and harboring resentment.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. And the good news is, it sounds like we actually have the power to break free from these patterns.
Absolutely. It all comes down to a shift in mindset. By studying our mistakes, creating those action plans, practicing self-discipline, and defining what success really means to us, we can absolutely overcome these challenges and build a more resilient and fulfilling life.
It's about trading in that scarcity mindset for one of abundance and celebration, like ditching the comparison game and focusing on our own unique path.
You nailed it. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process of self-reflection and growth. Some days will be easier than others, but the key is to keep practicing, keep learning, and keep moving forward.
And remember, you don't have to go it alone. Sometimes just talking about our struggles can be incredibly helpful. Don't be afraid to reach out to trusted friends, family, maybe even a therapist for support.
Absolutely. Sharing our experiences, both the good and the bad, can be so powerful. It helps us normalize those human emotions and realize that we're not alone in this.
It's about turning those I messed up moments into valuable lessons, not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
I love that. And Morin actually ends with a really thought-provoking question. She mentions that mentally strong people are often willing to share their mistakes to help others.
Makes sense, right? It's like turning our missteps into stepping stones for ourselves and those around us.
Exactly. So I'll leave you with this. What mistake could you share? And who might benefit from hearing your story? Could be something big or small, it doesn't really matter. The point is to embrace vulnerability and use our experiences to lift each other up.
That's a great takeaway. Keep those wheels turning, everyone. And until our next deep dive, happy learning.